Sometimes the foundation that holds everything together starts cracking in places you don't immediately notice, and by the time you realize the entire structure is compromised, you're already facing decisions that seemed impossible just months earlier. Welcome back to Lions News Fan Report, your daily destination for unfiltered analysis, breaking developments, and exclusive insights about our Detroit Lions that you won't get anywhere else. I'm bringing you the most critical information every single day, covering roster moves, strategic decisions, and the behind-the-scenes realities that will shape whether this championship window stays open or slams shut before we ever get our hands on a Lombardi trophy. Hit that subscribe button immediately and turn on all notifications, because what I'm revealing today involves the most important player on our entire roster and a scenario that could fundamentally alter the trajectory of this franchise for the next decade. Let me paint you a picture of something that's been developing quietly beneath the surface while most fans have been celebrating our success and championship aspirations. The 2026 free agent market is shaping up to be one of the weakest we've seen in years for addressing specific positional needs, particularly along the offensive line. Outside of maybe landing center Tyler Linderbaum or tackle Rashid Walker, the Lions are going to be almost entirely dependent on our scouting department and draft room to find solutions at multiple critical positions. This isn't the kind of offseason where you can just throw money at proven veterans and immediately upgrade your roster. This is the kind of offseason that tests organizational depth, evaluation skills, and long-term planning in ways that separate championship teams from pretenders. Now, here's where this situation starts getting concerning in ways that most people haven't fully processed yet. Taylor Decker, our veteran left tackle who's been protecting the blind side for years, has been dropping increasingly obvious hints about his future with the Lions and potentially with the NFL altogether. These aren't subtle comments that could be interpreted multiple ways. These are clear signals that retirement might be on his mind sooner rather than later, which means the Lions need to be preparing not just for reinforcements at center and guard, but specifically at left tackle as well. When you look at our current offensive line situation heading into next season, Penei Sewell and rookie Tate Ratledge feel like the only absolute certainties to return and start. Everything else is either uncertain, aging, or simply not good enough for a team with championship aspirations. The depth behind our starting offensive linemen is frankly inadequate for protecting a franchise quarterback long-term. Dan Skipper and Giovanni Manu represent the kind of depth that might get you through injury situations during a regular season, but they're absolutely not the caliber of players you want protecting your most valuable asset for years to come. This isn't a criticism of those players individually, it's a realistic assessment of their capabilities relative to what championship contenders require from their offensive line depth. The gap between what we currently have and what we actually need is significant and growing. But here's what I need you to really focus on, because this is where the entire situation takes a turn that Lions Nation needs to be prepared for. All of this offensive line uncertainty, all of these retirement hints from Decker, all of the questions about who's protecting the pocket moving forward, they don't exist in a vacuum. They directly impact the most important position on the field and the player who's been the face of our franchise renaissance. When your offensive line infrastructure starts crumbling, when the protection scheme that's allowed your quarterback to thrive is facing a complete overhaul, when you're looking at potentially starting multiple new faces along the line, you have to start asking difficult questions about sustainability and whether your current quarterback fits into a rebuilding offensive line timeline. Jared Goff is the player I'm talking about, and the scenario we need to seriously consider is whether the Lions might actually move on from him if this offensive line situation deteriorates as dramatically as current indicators suggest. Now, before anyone panics or accuses me of being reactionary, let me be absolutely clear about something. Goff has been nothing short of spectacular for this organization. He's transformed from a quarterback who was discarded by the Rams into one of the most efficient and productive signal callers in the entire NFL. His connection with this coaching staff, his mastery of Ben Johnson's offensive system, and his leadership in the locker room have been instrumental in turning the Lions from perennial losers into legitimate Super Bowl contenders. This isn't about Goff's performance or capability. This is about organizational strategy and difficult decisions that franchises sometimes have to make when circumstances force their hand. The reality that the Lions organization has to confront is this: if Taylor Decker retires, if we can't adequately replace him and multiple other offensive linemen through a weak free agent market, if we're forced to start multiple rookies or second-year players along the line in 2026, we're potentially putting Goff in a situation where he's getting pressured consistently, taking hits he shouldn't have to take at this stage of his career, and operating in a system that no longer provides the clean pocket and protection scheme that's allowed him to flourish. That's not fair to Goff, it's not optimal for the team's success, and it creates a legitimate question about whether it makes strategic sense to move in a different direction. Consider the financial and timeline aspects of this equation. Goff will be 32 years old in 2026, which isn't ancient for a quarterback, but also isn't young in a league that increasingly values mobility and the ability to extend plays when protection breaks down. If the Lions are facing a situation where they need to essentially rebuild their offensive line from scratch through the draft, they're looking at a 2 to 3 year development timeline before that line is truly elite again. Do you want your 32-year-old quarterback, who's never been known for exceptional mobility, playing behind a developing offensive line while simultaneously trying to compete for championships? Or do you consider a more radical option that allows you to align your quarterback situation with your offensive line rebuild timeline? The draft prospects that could theoretically replace Goff in 2026 or 2027 are intriguing. The quarterback class is expected to be deep with talent, featuring mobile dual-threat quarterbacks who can create outside of structure and who wouldn't be as dependent on perfect protection to be effective. If the Lions were to draft someone like Alabama's Proctor at left tackle in the first round, they could also be positioning themselves to select a quarterback in a subsequent draft who grows with that rebuilt offensive line, rather than asking a veteran like Goff to survive behind it during its development phase. I'm not saying this is what will happen or even what should happen, but it's a scenario that organizational decision-makers have to at least consider, given how the circumstances are aligning. The offensive line rebuild itself is going to require significant draft capital and developmental patience. Looking at mock draft scenarios, the Lions would need to target someone like Proctor, the Alabama product, who's ranked as the third best offensive lineman available and who allowed just 1 sack this season, along with only 3 quarterback hits and 16 total pressures according to advanced metrics. Even if Decker stays 1 more year, Proctor would represent a long-term solution at left tackle that we desperately need. The left guard position is similarly problematic, with the Lions having cycled through Christian Mahogany, rookie Miles Frazier, Kayode Wasika, and Tristan Cullen without any of them emerging as a clear long-term answer. A prospect like Pregnan from Oregon, who started every game at left guard for USC in 2024 without allowing a single sack, represents the caliber of player we need to be targeting. But here's the harsh reality that connects all of this back to the Goff situation. The Lions don't own a third-round pick in 2026 because of the trade-up for Isaac DeSlaw in 2025. Our draft capital is limited relative to the number of holes we need to fill along the offensive line. If we're committing multiple high picks to rebuilding that line, are we simultaneously in position to keep paying Goff top-tier quarterback money while he plays behind that developing unit? The salary cap implications, the competitive window considerations, and the strategic timeline all factor into a decision that's far more complex than simply, is Jared Goff a good quarterback? Because everyone knows he is. There's also the psychological and performance factor to consider. Goff has thrived in Detroit partially because of the stability and structure around him. He's had elite pass protection, he's had consistent coaching, he's had a system that maximizes his strengths and minimizes his weaknesses. If all of that stability disappears simultaneously because of offensive line turnover, does Goff remain the same highly efficient quarterback? History suggests that even great quarterbacks struggle when their protection deteriorates significantly. The Lions might be looking at this situation and asking themselves whether it's better to move on while Goff's value is still high rather than watching that value diminish as he takes more hits behind an inferior line. I want to be crystal clear that I'm not advocating for moving on from Goff. What I'm doing is presenting you with the uncomfortable strategic reality that the Lions organization is likely evaluating internally as they assess their offensive line situation heading into 2026. Championship organizations think multiple moves ahead. They make difficult decisions before they're forced into worse decisions later, and they're willing to be aggressive, even with franchise cornerstones, if the circumstances demand it. The offensive line situation could very well be that circumstance that forces a conversation about Goff's future that nobody in Lions Nation wants to have, but that organizational reality might demand. Now, I need to hear from you because this is the kind of decision that will define this franchise for years to come. Should the Lions commit to Goff, regardless of the offensive line situation, and just work to rebuild that line as quickly as possible around him? Or does the potential timeline mismatch between a rebuilding line and an aging quarterback create enough concern that considering a change makes strategic sense? How confident are you that the Lions can adequately address all these offensive line needs through the draft and still keep Goff protected? Drop your detailed thoughts in the comments below because I read every single one, and your perspectives matter in these massive organizational decisions. Looking at this whole situation, I remain optimistic about the Lions' ability to navigate whatever challenges come our way. If we keep Goff and successfully rebuild the offensive line through smart drafting, we could extend our championship window significantly. If organizational decision-makers determine that a different path makes more strategic sense given all these factors, I trust that they'll make that call with the franchise's long-term success in mind. Either way, the next 18 months will be absolutely critical in determining whether we're building toward sustained championship contention or whether we're facing a more comprehensive rebuild than anyone currently wants to acknowledge. Make sure you're subscribed to Lions News Fan Report and you've activated all notifications so you don't miss any updates on this developing situation or any other critical Lions news. Hit that like button if this analysis helped you understand the complexities of what the organization might be facing. Share this with every Lions fan who needs to be aware of these potential scenarios. And keep those comments coming with your reactions and opinions. This is where championship decisions get made, and I'll be here every single day making sure you have all the information you need. 1. Pride.